Hello everyone. Uh, Good evening and a very warm welcome. Um, Firstly, I would like to thank Christy and Raviraj for being here. Um, I will introduce them very briefly and give it to them, and they will take it forward from there. Um, okay, I am Satvik. I work as a relationship manager at Smart. Smart is a organization that works with that trains people in arts-based therapy, expressive arts therapy. Um, Again, thank you, Raviraj and Christy, for being here. Raviraj is an occupational therapist, children's book author, and a teacher who believes that all the problems of this world are rooted in the structural systems of oppression rather than in communities or people's bodies and identities. He consults with communities, children, families, adults, and organizations to discover and reauthor their preferred ways of being. He is a teacher of narrative practices and early childhood development and teaches in local and international workshops and diplomas. He supports the work of therapists and community health workers through supervision and consultation. Very warm welcome, Raviraj. Christy, this is the third time that Christy they're coming here for a talk here. We have really got hooked to Christy now, and I hope they continue to uh, engage with us. So Christy Nag is an Adivasi of Munda tribe whose work lies in the intersections of Adivasi, transgender, and child rights. Since 2016, they have been working along with Adivasi youth from tea gardens in Duars and is a member of Prayatna, striving for equality. Christy is pursuing integrated MPhil PhD at TIS, Mumbai, and is a member of Queer Collective TIS, Adivasi Students Forum TIS, and the Blue Dawn. They have been writing on Adivasi concerns from Adivasi perspective and has bylines in Youth Ki Awaz and First Post. Very warm welcome, Christy. um, Again, thanks both of you for being here, and then I will hand it over to Christy to kind of take it forward from here.
Thank you, Satvik, for this warm welcome and for the introductions. Um, so, yeah, just a while back, I was just asking Ravi, how should I introduce you? Thank you for making my work a bit easier here. Um, so, to begin with, uh, yeah, so to add on to all the introduction, like everything that Satvik mentioned, um, Ravi is an amazing storyteller, and this is something which I have witnessed myself. So, and he has made me fall in love with children's books. I like that is one thing that I was like, okay, want to tell everyone about Ravi. Um, to begin with, Ravi, I was just interested in your journey with narrative practices. If you can tell us about that.
Um, Hi, I'm Ravi. So my journey with narrative practices began in 2014 as part of an organization called Umeed Child Development Center. I was working there with families and children, and I still remember there was this one young person, 13-year-old, who would come to work on their handwriting. And because their parents had brought them in, because that's how mostly children come for therapy, because their parents bring them. And sometimes they don't want to be there. So this young person didn't want to be there, especially not to work on their handwriting. And I would be like, oh, but we are here to work on the handwriting. So we would play, and then they wanted to talk a lot. So we would talk and chat, about everything in life, about what's happening in school. But I was not like, because my work was so focused on working on certain specific occupational goals, I didn't think of, talking as a way to do things. And Jill, my best friend, and also one of my teachers, was part of the Narrative Practices India Collective. She start on Saturday evenings after work. She will teach me some strategies of certain maps of narrative practices, and then I will go and try that and come back, and she will teach me more. And it just sort of changed my relationship with that young person. We started talking about things that really mattered to them, and I was like, a 13-year-old could speak about values of life, about hopes they had, and how handwriting was not the most important part they wanted to work on. So that was my introduction to narrative practices, and Jill continued to teach me for almost a year until I did the year-long training program of narrative practices. Yeah, that's how I got introduced to it.
Thank you, Ravi, for sharing this. I was thinking of some of the key elements or key aspects of narrative practices that we were discussing like a few years back, I guess. So one being how stories play a crucial role and how we are born into stories. And this one line has remained with me. We are born into stories. So yeah, would you like to tell us more on this, or your love story with stories?
I think that I was completely fascinated by the idea of that we are born into stories, and that stories is what shapes us and is constantly sort of influencing our view of the world. My dear friend Alfonso Diaz from Mexico says it more beautifully. He says that stories are like, living things, that they are beings. He calls them story beings. And he will ask questions to make you think, and he will say, are we living the stories as stories are living through us? That because we both read this article where this person compared stories with the idea of mushrooms, that mushrooms have this very dense connection of rhizomes underneath the ground. And one of this particular botanist was sort of looking for this particular mushroom. And as they sort of searched for it, they found this really dense network, and which was spreading across the entire forest, and which has existed before the forest has existed. And so almost like the forest is born into the web of the mushrooms or the rhizomes. And so that we are born in this web of stories. Like, for example, the story of gender, like how to be in this world through a gendered lens. Like when little babies are born, they have no clue about what gender they are, and almost like stories are being wrapped around little bodies of what gender they should be, and almost like occupying people's bodies. Like this idea of how stories are living through us, or almost sometimes even controlling our sense of who we are. Christy, what attracted you to the idea of we are born in stories?
There are, so there's, we are born into stories as in the way I look into like life also, like, or what I'm doing right now. There is so much work that has been invested on it, and not just now, but I'm saying like my father, before my parents, before I was born, my grandparents, like the investment that they have made in my life. And it's so that primarily that we are like, I'm born into the story of my family, of my Adivasi community, and of the local community where I come from, Asansol. So I'm born into, or into so many multiple stories, not just like one story if I look into it. And born into the story of an Adivasi person negotiating with the state, living in an urban non-Adivasi area. So born into that story. So it's so yeah, that's just like, that is how I got fascinated with the idea of like, we are born into stories, and we are not just a singular person making trying to make
Mhm.
things in life per se. And simultaneously, this we write our stories as well. So it is like, it is not just that we are born into stories and it is being written and I have no agency into it, but also I am negotiating and navigating through the stories in which I'm born into, and writing stories myself. So it's
Mm.
just both the things.
Yeah. There's this person, because you spoke about writing stories, there's this person who I'm reading, Kai Cheng Thom. The book is called Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, a dangerous trans girl's confabulous memoir. And just the opening chapter is called Dangerous Stories. And they wrote, and why they write this book, and I just want to read like the first paragraph. I don't believe in safe spaces. They don't exist. I do, however, believe in dangerous stories. The kind that swirl up from inside you when you least expect it. Like the voice of a mad angel whispering of the revolution you're about to unleash. Stories that bend and twist the air as they crackle off your tongue, making you shimmer with glamour, so that everyone around you hangs on to every intoxicating word. The kind of stories that quiet mad girls dream of to bring themselves comfort after crying themselves to sleep at night. That made your poor starving grandfather cross an entire ocean in search of the unbelievable riches someone once told him were waiting on the other side. The kind of story that doesn't wait for you to invite it to enter, but bursts through the doors of your rat-infested house like a glittering wind, hungry to snatch up the carpet and scatter your papers and smash every single plate in the kitchen. That surges howling up the battered stairs to blast the stained sheets of your filthy bed and sweep your secrets out of the closet and send them shrieking outside, overjoyed to be finally set free. Where are those kind of stories about trans girls like you and me? And just the book is like the writing of the kind of story that, yeah, it's like just dangerous stories.
Dangerous stories. Yeah. And stories can be dangerous also, of especially how we tell stories. And I don't know what this. Okay, okay, before we move further with the conversation, this is just for everyone. Um, Ravi and me, we are just thinking of having, like, we will be having conversation. If you have any questions, please hold on to it. We will address them, or try our level best to address those questions towards the end. And yeah, coming back to what I was thinking of, um, dangerous stories. Before that, I think, like, in my opinion, I think we are all storytellers, um, engaging with stories, engaging with the pre-existing stories, writing our own stories, and also telling stories, and through our work, or like, I'm doing my studies, I'm doing my PhD at TSS. So there again, I'm writing stories, like through medium of research, and I'm just while you were reading Dangerous Stories, I was just thinking of this book by Linda Smith, where she says research is one of the dirtiest terms when it comes to um, uh, indigenous world per se, because the way researchers have written our stories is not the way we want to tell our stories, or not what exists there. That again, while telling this, I was thinking of this book on primarily forgetting. I have bad memory. Okay, I forget names. This a book on trans men. Um, do you remember the name of the author, Ravi? Wait. Um, yeah, there was a trans men later on came out and said, "We do not. This is not our story." But Penguin has already published this book, and it's out there. So that is the story which people will read. So it just matters how we tell stories.
Yeah.
So are stories political then, Ravi?
I love the rhetoricness of the question. Yeah, stories are very much political, and I feel like a talk that I go back to all the time is called "Dangers of a Single Story" by Chimamanda Adichie, and in which Chimamanda says that stories, like any other things, are governed by a system of power. You know, who tells the story? When is that story told? What parts of the stories are being told? What parts of the stories are not being told? How many stories are told? How many stories are told? And all of that changes a conversation, right? Like in my work with disabled in people and disabled children particularly, there is a constant telling of a story of disabled children as incomplete bodies, or disabled children as bodies that are deformed, that need correction. You know, the disability as a thing that needs to be corrected. And there's a whole medical industrial complex built around it, right? Therapists, doctors, social workers, all of us working towards correcting the disability in the child, and almost working towards erasure of a community. Like we have tests that identify disability in the womb and gives permission to mostly able-bodied parents to decide that they can abort the kid, no? And like, how do we make these, and these are complex conversations, they're not like simple answers between, because that stories are so powerful that it has convinced a group of people that they need to erase disability or disabled bodies from this world, right? Or therapeutic practices that are constantly trying to teach children how to speak, you know, rather than saying that the world is designed in such a way that speaking a certain kind of language is the only way to communicate and exist in this world. And it is not, you know. But that part of the story where we start saying that this is not the only way to communicate the words, no? Like there's this book that is written by Andrew Solomon called Far From the Tree. And it's a book of collection of stories of caregivers or parents who have disabled children, or who have children who have fell far from the tree of what parents are. And in one of those arguments that he's making is he's sort of talking to the deaf community and parents of deaf children. And there is this argument about cochlear implants, no? These implants that are put in children's bodies when they are little so that they can start hearing, and so that their language development happens. Now, there's an argument in that book that is cochlear implant a way to erase the deaf community? And are you asking permission from the little child whether you want to be a part of the deaf community or do you want to have the cochlear implant? But you have to do this surgery very early on in birth. So this complex conversation where we are saying, because there's a strong story being told of deafness is as a bad thing that needs correction, but not of the alternate story that deafness is an identity, that this is who we are. That stories are dangerous. They lead to murder. They lead to genocides. They're continuing to do all of that. And like Chimamanda says, if we only say one part of the story, we are lying. We have to say all the stories that are existing and trust that communities and people will make a choice of what they think. Stories.
Thank you for bringing that up, Ravi. And yeah, while you were saying, I was also thinking, um, how do we look at, or how do we navigate through stories and try to look at it as a whole? Because Chimamanda is a turf that's just out there. The when we look at the story of gender per se, she does not recognize. She fails to recognize beyond the binary. So, while she herself is saying we need to look at stories as a whole, so like we all can be flawed. So, but at the same time, how do we look? How do we do this then? Like, how do we be mindful and consciously like navigate through stories and try to look at the whole story?
I think that one is that we cannot know about everything alone. We can only know about everything together, which means that we have to acknowledge that we all don't know like each person doesn't know all the stories. To know all the stories, we have to engage with each other to know that. So one of the things is that narrative practices really brings in is loitering, is intentional loitering and slowing down. That it is really important to loiter in these stories and pay very careful attention to little things, what we particularly call unique outcomes, something that's different from the dominant story. The other thing that I particularly like about narrative practices is that people are not the problem. That problem is the problem. That I cannot cancel a person because they are not that identity, that they're informed by a certain kinds of stories, but there's always a breach in that story. And I want to pay careful attention to the breach, like where did Chimamanda's understandings of gender comes from? I'll be curious to know more about that. In my work with people, particularly men who do harm, and sometimes that they justify the harm, is to spend time loitering of how did you come to this understanding that it's okay for you to do this, And as we do that, we deconstruct these stories. But while I'm deconstructing these stories, I'm also paying careful attention to their meaning of love, to their meaning of nurturing, And when I get an entry point into that part of the story, for me to ask, how did you know to do that? How did you know that this leads to nurturance? Like, can you tell me more? And then there is history to that story of nurturing and care, which has never been sort of walked on. And so how do we sort of develop richer stories of nurturance, of care, and at the same time sort of deconstruct these stories of how they have come to this understanding of violence as a way of, justified way of doing relationships. So thinking that is that intentionally loitering in people's stories, paying really careful attention to the breach in this dominant story. The third part I feel is documenting these stories, about that are alternate than what has been told to all of us all the time. And how do we document these stories? Like, we did this book called Jugaad a few years back, and it was a book that was done with the intention, because in the mental health space, most of the documentation is done by professionals and experts who sit in clinical rooms, and write about mental health, almost like not that it is not it is not political at all, but science based in brains, that kind of dominant story of mental health. And we wanted to be a part of that movement where we were challenging this idea that, mental health is not political, that it is political. So what the Jugaad book was a documentation of stories of young people from marginalized communities telling what does health mean to them, and what are their ways of responding to health, and what are their ways of responding of taking care of themselves. So really trying to think about how do we document these stories and put them out there. This, am I talking a lot?
No.
And this this article that you must have also read during the diploma, called The Discourses in the Mirrored Room. That article, which, Hare Mustin, one of the earliest feminist writers, wrote that therapeutic rooms are like single-lined mirrors. Like, imagine this room which I'm sitting in, you and me are sitting in, is like lined with just mirrors. And the only thing we can see in this room is what we both understand. So it will only reflect what I am thinking of, not the world, what's happening in the outside world. And so if a therapist enters the room thinking that caste does not influence people's mental health, or indigeneity does not influence people's health, that this person's identity of caste doesn't matter for my therapeutic conversation, the moment the therapist closes the door, that identity stays out of the room. How much ever the person tries to bring it up, the room will only reflect what the person in power is listening to. So the whole idea is, how do we develop cracks in this mirrored room, so that we let the stories that are in the world outside be part of the conversation. What's catching your attention, Christy, or what are you thinking as I'm talking?
I was primarily thinking of intentional loitering, and that is a very specific narrative practice cut term. And I was thinking of like, what can, as in an everyday thing, what would intentional loitering look like? And that was maybe curiosity, as in not in a very nosy way, but just being curious, as in, okay, this is not the only thing about the person around me or beings around me. There are multiple things which it is fine if I do not know also, but just holding on to that. So it might look like curiosity. I don't know if I'm right.
No,
Just thinking.
Any story comes to your mind about intentional loitering and curiosity that somebody showed or you witnessed in some ways, or that led you into many stories about a community, a person, or something that even...
So recently at Prayatna, we did a workshop. We used narrative practices, like whatever I learned there in the course, and the work that we do at Blue Dawn. So we used some of those to do the workshop there with Prayatna. So there a team presented a skit And the skit was primarily on um, uh, they showed multiple things. It was primarily on the retirement support that workers get, like after retirement, the retirement right, the rights that they have with respect to provident fund, gratuity. So it's with respect to that. And in tea gardens, it's a huge nexus now, wherein the union leaders and the Babu PF staff from the company and the PF commissioner's office, they're all interlinked, and they will not let you get they did not let the workers get the PF unless they get their cut. And it is a huge cut, like 30-40% of the retirement money. That is the only savings of the family per se. So giving that, doing away with that just to get, otherwise they will make you run for 2-3 years to get your rights, which should be done in 30 days. They were talking about this, all of this in the skit, and they connected it with alcoholism. And uh, and that was something like, okay, of course people talk of alcoholism here कि हाँ पर बहुत ज़्यादा दारू पीते हैं लोग, but then underneath that people do not try to be curious, okay, what can be the probable reasons. So one of the things that the team talked about was key, there is so much of worry with respect to provident fund, how to get my rights per se, and the nexus is such that they are just making you run, and that worry is leading to consumption of more alcohol just to evade that situation for that brief time. And we, honestly speaking from my life, I do need, like, there are times when I do need to just not be there have been situations where I just do not want to be in that situation and would like to evade even for a brief time. So that is leading to alcoholism, and that is like, okay, this is the team had a curious lens per se to look at issues or what's happening there. So this one thing that you mentioned, I was curious to that, getting it. The cracks per se, the mirror room and the cracks that you're mentioning. If like what are the things that as practitioners, be it mental health or social workers or community workers or just as human beings, just as people, what are the things that we can do to bring in these cracks in our lenses?
I think one is to believe that marginalized communities, people are experts of their own lives, and to really believe it from the heart, that they know about life more than, if you have navigated your life in margins, you have an exemplary skills of map making, of finding routes through these treacherous, problematic territories that are occupied by these dominant spaces. So one of the things is to really, because I don't know many things as a practitioner, so the only way to know this is from somebody who knows how to do this, because they have lived their lives in that way. So is the stance of constant curiosity, but from a position of not knowing, that I don't know. I'm not the expert in this room, but the person sitting in front of me is the expert in the room. So like one of these young persons I used to work with, they were like 4-year-old when I started working with them. And one of the struggles they had was having really bad dreams. And they couldn't sleep for many days. At a point, we came to a point where medications was becoming an option. And one night it happened that they slept. And so the mom called me the next day morning saying this happened. And I said, let's meet today itself, And so I went to their house to meet them. And we started playing and talking. And as we were talking, I was really curious because I believe that the 4-year-old is the expert of their own life, of how did they navigate, And so on asking, how did you do that? Like mom said, you slept, and what happened? And I really didn't know, I had made a few guesses in my head, but obviously none of them came true. They said to me that Messi came in my dream and kicked all the bad monsters, no? And I didn't know who Messi is because I don't watch football. So I was like, obviously being, oh, what is Messi? And then I said, what is Messi? So the young person said, Raviraj, what is not the word? It is who is Messi. So I also got corrected in my grammar, but also and got schooled in what football is for the next few weeks because it seemed like a really bad thing to do. But they said that Messi came in my dreams and kicked the monsters again. And it is not that it was something that happened out of its own will. It's because the young person responded to that. So we drew Messi that evening, and stuck it next to the bed, and the team started growing. And this became a team of people who would help them when bad monsters come. And what were these monsters? No, and over a period of time, we discovered that this young person didn't identify with the gender they were assigned. And the monsters were of cisgenderism that were constantly pushing their body in certain ways. But we only found the language to talk about it 2 years later. But till that point, to continue to persist that it's not something going on wrong in their brain or body. It's something that's playing out, and we are not able to yet locate the problem. So to continue to persevere is the other thing. Really believing that people develop know-hows. And I particularly like this word know-how that Michael White, thought of instead of the word knowledge. And I love it because knowledge is often seen something that's institutional, that's passed on from, this powerful institution to you, and you take it and you pass it. But know-how is something that's generated in people's lived experience, right? The know-how of making tea in a certain way, which my mother makes, and I cannot replicate it because it's her way of doing it. I have my way of figuring out how she does it. But people in the margins are constantly responding on an everyday basis, and these know-hows are never developed into stories. So when young people say, or when people say in conversations that they did it this way, my often next question is, can you tell me more? How did you learn to do that? And often there's a pause, learn to do that, Raviraj, like who learns to do these things? But as you persist, you start developing a history of this know-how, that it just didn't happen automatically. Like people say, oh, I just did it, or it was automatic or instinctual, or it was a gut feeling. All of this is, stories that need to be heard, seen, developed. They don't happen automatically. People do things to make that possible. So I feel like holding the stance of curiosity, being influential in the room, believing that people are experts of their own lives and that they have know-hows to navigate this is what really helps. And also, when I say the word influential, I mean that it is important to reflect on what is the stance of the person, like the community health worker, the social worker, the therapist, or the doctor. I cannot say caste doesn't exist and walk into the room. Then I am, participating in perpetuating caste violence without knowing about it. I cannot say things like, I cannot not think about patriarchy is always ever present in all conversations of life. They are ever present everywhere. It's my skill that I develop how to identify that in the room. Yeah. Am I making sense, Christy?
Yes, you are. I was just adding to the list colonialism for that matter. Like, we cannot say colonialism does not exist. It Britishers went away, but colonialism is still there, and we are looking at what is happening uh, with the tribal and Adivasi communities here, with Kashmir here. So it's just there, and it is not just geographies. It is also we do not see a way of life being respected. So it's primarily that. So so yeah, then how does that relate with our uh, uh, everyday existence per se? So um, yeah, just adding to one more thing to the list you mentioned. Um, uh, Also looking at, like, especially now we are consuming stories through books, through research documents, through documents, through video, audio means per se. But then also looking at who is telling these stories becomes crucial. So uh, yeah, would you like to add something to that, Ravi?
Do you want to start, Christy?
Uh, yeah, sure. Yeah, matlab, for me, it is. This is something which Divya and myself we keep saying. Mine is not the first generation talking of colonialism, of the influence of colonialism in our communities, or talking about our communities per se. um, our ancestors have been doing that, so let us pay a keen ear to them and just like try to listen to them uh, through just for example, Virginia Sir has written so much, so like, and the positionality of the author, of the writer, of the storyteller kind of matters. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I feel like I think that you because I love children's picture books, and one of the conversations that we often have within the children's picture book world is that how there is a significant lack of in India of children's stories around of queer children, disabled children, Dalit Bahujan Adivasi children in children's picture books. And even when they are told, they are not told by those who are part of the community, right? They're told by a group of people who are privileged and who are um, uh, telling these stories about other groups of people, but in the first voice. And that becomes a very tricky spot because if you like, I particularly love this book that came out recently which Timira Gupta wrote, called Goplu's Train Ride. But Timira writes the book, she's showing class difference, how children perceive class difference. But she's writing the book from her perspective from a certain class that she is in, and talking about what she is seeing, rather than talking about that other class and how they see the world. And that is where I feel like a dear friend recently said that we have to draw a boundary of which stories cannot be told by a certain group of people. Like Adivani, which we were talking about recently, of would you like to talk about the Adivani publications?
So Adivani is Ruby Hemrop. She's the founder of Adivani, and her basic idea is we need to tell our stories from our of the way we want to tell our stories. So and that is important. It should not be just random storytelling, but the way we want it to be, the way we want the world, not and the way it is per se. So telling stories. telling authentic stories is important. And for that, positionality again becomes very crucial, कि हम कौन से positionality से लिख रहे हैं, या फिर हमारा positionality allow भी करता है हमें लिखने के लिए कि नहीं. तो or even if suppose we are not from that community per se, then how do we place ourselves in writing those stories? So uh, so those questions are also, like, I'm not saying you cannot tell the stories, but how do you place yourself then in writing those stories, in telling those stories? Then that becomes very crucial. And again, coming back to Adivani here, so yeah, so Ruby started Adivani with that story, with that understanding, and there were no publishing houses publishing books in English for and trying to write authentic stories from Adivasi tribal communities. So that is how Adivani came into being. And yeah, so you can continue, Ravi. Like, you had something in mind. I'm not sure.
No, that same that children's picture books that Adivani is producing, no, or putting out there are stories being told in what you call the authentic ways of telling stories. And I feel like within the work that I do, the people I meet for therapy conversations is for them to tell the stories of their own experiences of life. You know, like when somebody is said that given a diagnosis of autism, there is a single story of autism that's been told to them by the medical fraternity, that it's a disorder which needs to be treated, and you need to remove the autism out of the child or the adult. But when you start engaging in conversations and engaging in listening to the autistic person telling their story, is that autism as an identity and not something that as a disability as an identity that does not need to be removed, because this is who I am and you cannot remove that of me. But it will only happen when we are curious and asking questions from a perspective to listen. So that that when people are given diagnosis, what meaning are they making of the diagnosis, rather than what meaning is a certain powerful institution making of that diagnosis, and almost subjugating the person's lived experience of that. Right? So the whole idea of narrative practices is that how do we pay attention to the lived experiences of their meaning making of the words that are being given to them. And with young people, I love working with young people because one of the things I can ask them is like, would you want to change the name of this thing or call it something else? And to find it, no, and they will come every week and change the name. And I love that play of language because I feel like what power they can have, like the kind of agency they can experience to keep on changing the name of this thing, which has been researched and evidence-based, and, you know, and they are like turning it upside down all the time. And so, yeah, like playing with language and the politics of language with young people. And you can be influential by even asking that question. Okay, would you like to change the name of this thing, or would you like to keep it? And that it says that, oh, it's possible to change the name of this thing. And they might choose to stay with it. But that to be tentatively influential and to be constantly checking. Yeah.
This also comes to the point I was thinking of right now. Stories are not static; they're moving, and the names can change. It is so, like, one thing that has happened with the indigenous communities is a very static story being told that they are uh, क्या बोलते हैं they live in the forest. That is one static story. One, or they are yeah, pre. I'm forgetting the term itself. It's there in my head, not able to think. Um, they're not contemporary. What is the term for that?
Prehistoric? No.
Something, I'm forgetting the exact term, but they're not contemporary. So so yeah, the primitive someone just mentioned. Thank you, Sneha, for sharing, for helping me out here. So yeah, primitive. So so that is another static story that is told and retold with respect when it comes to Adivasis per se. कि ये तो primitive है, समय के साथ नहीं है. So again, that is not true. So so yeah, I love. Okay, I love one video that Sneha along with Eugene and a few other friends, they made this video. I'll put in the link here, or if I'll just request someone to put in the link. It's a beautiful song, beautiful video that's there. So that again tells a very contemporary story when it comes to Adivasis. So yeah. So I don't have any questions per se, but do you have any questions, Ravi, for me, or do you want to share anything?
I was thinking about when you were saying about the story of primitiveness, no? And it's such a powerful one that's being told all the time, and which leads to policy making, which leads to the articles that you and your friends put together in First Post, like labels Adivasis as encroachers to their own lands. What kind of, because these stories have real effects. What kind of effects does the story of calling Adivasis primitive and stuck in time have, you feel, on, yeah?
So one of the effects that it has is this is one incident that few of our friends from Prayetan experienced. So they were going for their higher studies, and the police assumed they are going as to work somewhere. It is fine to go to work somewhere, but the assumption was that they are not going for education. They're going there to do either domestic work or work in a hotel. So that was the assumption, and they verified their documents 3-4 times. They had to ask their parents to come in and verify, okay, no, they are going to study. They're going to this place, to this college to study. So again, this entire story of they're primitive, in that way they are not civilized, and education is for civilized society. So that entire thing was there. हाँ ठीक ये जा रहे हैं तो काम करने जाएंगे, मतलब पढ़ाई थोड़ी ना करने जाएंगे. So yeah, that is there. And then again, stories is again connected with the legislations that is made. The Transgender Act is an act because, how to say it, the stories was told wrong when it comes to transgender people and the community, the genderqueer, intersex community. And that ad we never wanted. There was and again, this entire process of the transgender bill becoming an act goes on to show the lack of willingness to listen to stories, willingness to listen to the people holding that positionality to tell the stories. The sheer lack of doing that. So yeah, now that bill is now an act because there was the people in position of power are not willing to engage and listen to the authentic sources of stories. And then that is an act now which is going to regulate our lives per se. It is not just in vacuum. So that again is there. Um, uh, so yeah, it is not in disconnection per se. That is what I was trying to bring in.
Yeah, it also reminds me of the one of those collective documents that a group of women made in Mexico called "Planting Seeds, Flying Kites." Have you seen that at some point?
I
It's
guess yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
and this thing about when stories are being told about, and they came together to write
Mm.
response to the gendered violence that each of them were responding to in their houses. And the document they named it was "Planting Seeds, Flying Kites." And they used the metaphor of footballs. And they say that we do not want to be footballs. We do not want to be kicked by men around when we are central to the game, that you cannot play the game without us. No, we want to be the kickers and we want to kick. But then they say that no, we shouldn't kick. Actually, we shouldn't play games where somebody is being kicked and somebody is not. No. And so we need to stop these kind of stories, because stories from this don't nurture anything. And so they say that we want to plant seed, we want to be kites, kites who all of us can fly. And we want to plant seeds of new traditions and practices, seeds of traditions and practices that we have that have come to us, but we want to evaluate them and decide. Just because it's passed on from generation, we're not going to take it.
Mm.
Because what's passed down as wisdom is sometimes can be inheritance of violence through it. No, like we have been taught as women that love can take shape of violence also, and that it's okay. We don't want to plant these traditions. And they go on to explain how they want to plant seeds which will think about nurturing and caring. And that to write this document as a way to tell their story. And then they send this document to different parts of the world. And then women's groups from different parts of the world wrote back, and it's sort of almost like one of the indigenous women from Australia wrote in the letter that if you ever feel alone, just put your hand inside the, land and feel us, and we're there with you in this. Like the roots of the trees that are connected, the document. So how can we abolish these stories that are harmful of people, so yeah, just thinking.
Yeah, while you were sharing, I was thinking of conversations, like not just one, multiple conversations that we've been having with my friends, indigenous Adivasi tribal women, um, and primarily looking at our engagement with feminism, where we want to carry forward stories and navigate through stories, and not just navigate, how to say, work with stories and see what we should carry forward, uh, and what is fine to not carry forward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that just like I'm just reminded of all of those conversations where, um, so it is also we are navigating through stories, uh, and yeah, I was just thinking of those conversations per se.
Yeah. Do you think this is a good point to invite the audience and see if people have questions?
Yes.
Okay. So we're opening the conversation for people who are listening if you would like to ask questions or say something that's resonating with you, ask questions about narrative practices or things we are sharing. You can put it in your chat box, put it in the chat box, or ask, or unmute yourself and ask us. Anisha is asking where I can find planting seeds and flying kites and jugaad. Or jugaad, planting seeds and flying kites. I can, maybe we can send it across. I don't know whether it's there online anywhere, but maybe we can just send it across through email. I can send it to Satvik.
Thank you, Prajoti.
Prabjot.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, I'm Neelam this side. I wanted to ask a question. That, stories seem such a powerful medium to, for expression. So if one wants to actually learn more about narrative practices, so what's a good beginning? What's a good, way to begin? From where do I start? Because I'm a volunteer counselor working with an organization, and I really want to now explore more about narrative practices. So what would be the beginning? How do I begin to even learn some more about it?
Maybe 2-3 things that's coming through ways of doing it. One is there are a few books that are out there about narrative practices, which are a good starting point if you are a reader. One of them is called What is Narrative Therapy by Alice Morgan, which is a book that I absolutely love because in the way it's written. The other is in narrative practices, there are something called as maps, because we believe that one of the ways we think of a metaphor to understand human identity is the metaphor of landscapes, as if that we have landscapes, and certain landscapes are occupied by problem territories, and certain landscapes are what we prefer in our lives. So how do we sort of navigate through these landscapes? And for that, we need maps. And so Michael White, who was one of the co-founders of narrative practices, developed a few maps which we learn use in narrative practices. And so he's written a book called Maps of Narrative Practices, which is before he passed away, he published this book which has all the maps that he thought about. So this is another good book to look at. SMART is organizing a workshop in Jan, where I'm teaching the introduction to narrative practices. It's a starting point workshop to know what narrative practices entails. They'll publicize it soon. So that's another thing. And we are a collective called Narrative Practices India. And we run workshops, we put out resources. So we have a website which you can go and subscribe onto.
Yeah, thank you so much. That would definitely be useful.
Hi, this is Swati.
Hi, Swati.
Thank you, Raviraj and Christy. It was wonderful listening to both of you. You spoke about something in the very beginning, and it has really gotten me thinking. You spoke about, being differently abled, and how that is seen as a disability. And like you spoke about being deaf, how like children are not given a choice. They are unable to exercise their choice. But I had a question and I would love to hear your opinion or your thought process, not like opinion, because you said it's a story. Story is like being in a dangerous space. It's not trying to find a safe space and exploring all different angles to it. Like if some surgery, for example, can be done only in very early childhood, and as parents, you are trying to do the very best for your children, come what may. So, how can you do the very best in a manner that the child also doesn't feel violated? I don't know. This is the question that was meant to be asked, but this is the question that is struggling inside me.
Yeah. And I can just resonate with the struggle of the question also, right? Like we don't have an answer to that question, because it is a struggle of how do we make that decisions that are very tricky ones. And are there ever right decisions? I don't know, because the meaning of that decision keeps on changing. I have worked with families, some families for 15 years, walked alongside with them. And I've seen them evolving the meaning of what had happened at that point of time to where they are at now and when they see it. What I was saying with the cochlear implant conversation is that I work with an organization that works with caregivers, the parents of children with cochlear implants. And I've had some of the most beautiful conversations with them and some of the most difficult ones because of the decisions that they had to take now. But the thing is that it is important to continue to struggle with that question and not find a simple answer out of that question. Mm-hmm. Because, Mariam Kibe, I'm forgetting their name, like surname and pronouncing them. They wrote this book called Fumbling Through Repair, and it's an accountability conversation that we are having, right? Like parents have to be accountable but we don't know how to do this. So we are fumbling through it. And how do we walk alongside rather than cancel people, or cancel parents as bad parents and completely delete them off the conversation. So the cochlear implant conversation is to keep that conversation alive, that it is a tricky decision when we decide to choose that cochlear implant has to be, because we are erasing the deaf identity of the child. If we believe that deafness is not something that needs to be treated, but it's an identity. So if we tell that story of deafness as an identity, as a community, then because parents have never heard, most of the parents I've worked with never heard that deafness is an identity, Mm-hmm. They have seen it as something that is a medical thing that needs to be corrected because a child will not be able to speak, because the world is designed to speak. And only if you speak, you'll be successful, which is true also. So in so many ways, it's not false that the world is so much hyper-focused on verbal speech and not on sign as a language. So if we promote or participate in or develop audiences to the story of deafness as a community, sign as a language, very much a language to communicate, we might start influencing the decision of cochlear implants, right? And cochlear implants are, again, a part of a medical industry. I want to call it an industry, because a certain group of people benefit out of that money. And it's to not say, I'm not saying that people who do cochlear implants or parents who choose are not making the right decision or wrong decision. No, they are decisions and they're important ones and they need to have. But how do we hold space for the complexity of this conversation and not simplify
That's beautiful, Ravi, and it's bringing me to a point where we are trying to create clones in this world instead of nurturing identity, nurturing the differentness that exists in each one of us. Like if we see, it's not just the medical industry, but it's literally everywhere. Everybody wants their children to be outgoing, outspoken, this, that, educated, and everything. We're not focusing on what each child inherently, innately can be. I think so. It's a wider discussion that this point has taken me to. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
For your questions, Swati. Yeah, Anisha.
Anisha has a question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that. Hi, thank you so much, Smart, for organizing this. Thank you so much, Christy and Raviraj. That was a beautiful, beautiful. I love the dialogue. I love the give and take of the entire conversation. So I am based in the UK, and I'm working with. I've started like I perform a art form called playback theater, and in playback theater we have already, I think we use a lot of tools of narrative in the way the conductor asks for the story, holds the story, and in the way the players kind of play back the story and honor the story. And now we have an opportunity where we are working with a community of young adults, so they are 16 to 18-year-olds, and we are going to be going in and taking playback to them. And like you already said, that we can't possibly know all the stories, but I feel in between now and when we see these students and we don't know what they are, we don't have that much time where we would know each of their personal stories. We're aware that they've gone through really tough times. They're from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and I'm just wondering like what we could as a team do to prepare ourselves to hold those stories and honor their stories and to create that space for them, like because we are facilitators and we are teaching this new art form for them, and we are hoping that theater would give them that space to tell their own stories. If I know you all both have like a lot of experience, if you have any tools or anything that we could do as a team to prepare. I mean, apart from playback being that container which has a lot of tools in the moment, but in just being aware, like even if I as a person I need to be aware about what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in Afghanistan and India and Kashmir, like I feel sometimes I don't know it all. And I still feel before I go and see a bunch of 30, 40-year-old young adults who've been through and seen through so much, I need to know something more. So if you could just throw some light on that. Thank you so much.
Ravi, would you like to start? Like share?
You want to start or you want me to start?
You start, I'll add.
Thank you for that question, Anisha. And I think the thing that I like, one of the stories that we have been told and which education tells us, schooling education tells us that we need to know everything. It is an impossible task. It is like we're set for failure. We cannot know everything. It is not possible to know everything. We can only know everything together, which means that how do we bring that relational understanding of knowing into the conversation, that I can only know something in relationship with others, which is what universities, academics, in my experience of learning, has never been a part of. It is so individual in our learning. So one of my one of my teachers, America Bracco, who works in this organization called, who founded the organization Latinel Taxis, talks about how do we bring communities at the center of the conversations about health, And a group of women and young people I'm working with since the last 3-4 years now in Dadra Nagar Haveli, who are from different Adivasi tribes who have been, we were invited by an organization to come there and work on child development because that was what we were doing. And we said we need 3 days to meet people because there was a program, there was the funding, we had to go and start working there. And so when the first 3 days was a visit to understand the context, 3 days was what I thought would be good idea to understand. But I'm laughing because 3 days, the program was supposed to last for 1 year. It's going on even now. But what we did was we said we will meet all the community health workers in their homes, if they're okay, or somewhere, to know what they feel they want. The women said, it's not just us, you have to invite all the other women from the villages we are working in. So we said, okay. So in the town hall, 185 women came together and sat for 3 hours and discussed and debated and argued and resonated and came down to 10 things they wanted us to pay attention to. And child development was the 10th one in that whole conversation. The first one was gendered violence that they wanted to stop. And that changed our approach to the conversation, that we had gone with the idea that child development is what needs to happen. So one of the ways is how do we invite the community to become part of the conversation. So developing your own set of questions to ask them, and doing our own work of reading, our own work of thinking. I can totally think of one as a starting point. And the second is, Anisha, a reflection of your own positionality. Like, what is your positionality? I live in Kathmandu right now, born and brought up in Bombay. One of the things that I had never identified as was as an oppressor in the context of, Nepal, like the role India plays in the context of Nepal, and how that this position of power that I come from when I live in this place. So to reflect on those identities of our own positionality and spending time, but doing it with care and doing it with gentleness towards ourselves and not with shame and guilt. They're harsh conversations, but they are important ones when we engage with people who are marginalized because of where we are located sometimes. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ravi, for that beautiful answer. Yeah. If anyone else has any further questions.
Somebody asked in chat to repeat about the discourses in the mirrored room idea. I'll just, it's I can send it to Smart and they can send it to you all, the article called Discourses in the Mirrored Room. The idea is that if the room is lined with single lined mirrors, it will only reflect those ideas which I know of. So if I don't understand, if I don't know about the discourse of like what caste the person I'm talking to belongs to, then I will never acknowledge that as a part of the conversation. Even when they're saying to me that in my office, people are, treating me like I don't know enough, And when they're saying those things to me, I will not be hearing that it is happening also because they're Dalit, because I don't know about this the caste discourse, because I don't know about it. So the mirror room will never reflect it. Even when they are saying it, I will never be able to hear it until I become curious and develop cracks in my own understanding of caste, and read about it and learn about it and listen about it. And then I would, when they say that people treat me like I don't know enough, what I'll hear is, this is caste-based discrimination also. This is gender-based discrimination also that is happening. That it's not that they don't know enough. No, that's not true. It's that they're made to feel that they don't know enough because of who they are as a person. And most of the organizations are, run by.
Yeah, while you were sharing this and the previous responses fell away, I was just reflecting on how how the entire world is surrounded, is filled with experts, and they want to continue to be experts. And somehow we need to break that way of doing work per se. Um, and or maybe look at and just drop the word beneficiary altogether, as in and just look at people, look at communities as experts. Just want to share this, not because I'm from Prayatna, just I find this uh, akhara for education quite beautiful. um, so there again in Tea Gardens, the schools, public schools is closed, and it's completely collapsed. The system is completely collapsed right now. Is the खुला था तब भी बेहतर नहीं था, but at least there was some place for children to anchor to, for them to go to sit with books, to listen to stories, to play, to hang out with friends. So all of those things is now not there, has not been there for since the pandemic hit all of us. So now the youth, the from the tea gardens itself, they saw this happening. Like, okay, we need to do something, and then they reflected, okay, ठीक है, our ancestors have been talking of akhara, where they would just sit and have discussions and talk about life, talk about the village, talk about what is happening in the village, in the community. And there it would be a place where they would enjoy going there, as in there would be dance, there would be music around it. So, and they're like, okay, we should use this concept. And now we have three akras where it is not primarily education or not primarily sitting with books. It is they sat together with children, like they had a meeting discussion with me children. Okay, okay, what do you want in the akra? What can we do, what are the things that we should do, like, okay, want to listen to stories, we want to play, we want to have drawing. So the days then got divided. Okay, one day we'll do drawing, one day we'll just tell stories, and one of the days they invite agua, a village leader, a community leader, to come and tell stories. And it is not bracketed, they just come and tell stories. So again, like, communities are experts, they know what they want. Children are experts, they know what they want. We just need to listen to them with a curious ear. They can, yeah.
And I think that the other thing that I often think about is that academia teaches us to confront each other so much, like defend your thesis. And I'm like, why would you defend? Like, what's the word about defending? And like when I was doing my master's, finishing my master's in med school, it was like I had 4 examiners sitting in front of me throwing questions and just feeling confronted, and you've worked something for 3 years and you're sharing with people. So how do we not nurture resonance over confrontation? How do we start from a point of resonating with each other, of what am I resonating with what you're sharing, rather than let's confront, and that we should confront. It's not to say do not confront, but what if we could do that in the territory of resonance and confront? That if we are responding to communities, how do we start from a place of resonance rather than of confrontation?
Yeah.
Thank you, Christy. It's 7:28.
Yeah, maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions max, if anyone has, and then we'll just conclude. If not, then is there any concluding thought that Ravi you would like to share?
No, I can't think of any, but I feel like the last thing that we spoke about, I think about starting from a place of resonance over confrontation. It's important for me in this work, as therapist also, to resonate rather than confront. Even with, I think, the work of responding to those who do harm, and then when they come to talk, rather than confronting them, how do we hold space for transformation, and that can only happen if we start from a place of resonance together. So that's, Christy, do you have a concluding thought?
For me, it was primarily this learning together thing that you shared today. So I'm holding on to that. And by that I also mean like building relationships or building spaces where we can learn together and grow together. So I feel that that is crucial than just thinking of learning, but then just building spaces where we can just hold each other and learn from each other with each other. And yeah.
Satvik, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Raviraj and Christy. It was it was a lovely, gentle conversation, and it, you know, I'm just sitting in front of, with my balcony door open, and there's a cool breeze coming in, and it was the conversation was very similar, um, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and yeah, thanks everyone for who have joined, who have asked questions, who have been curious. Um, for those who are interested to know more, as Raviraj mentioned, we are organizing a workshop facilitated by him on January 21st and 22nd. It's a Friday and a Saturday. It will be a, I think, 10 to 5 workshop kind of a thing with an hour's break, where um, around narrative therapy. So do check out. I have put the link in the chat if you are interested. This video will be shared online on Instagram. We are at Smart Mode 2011, and on Facebook we are Studio for Movement Arts and Therapies. This video will be shared. A YouTube link will be shared online. So if you have friends who are not able to attend and they would like to watch it, you can share the link and stuff. And if there is anything, just reach out to us through social media or yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christy. And thank you, Satvik.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone, and yeah, thank you Ravi and Smart and Satvik.